Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. This is a scene that we are painting today. It is essentially a monochromatic landscape, but I'm using a few colors to make the hue that I have, but supplies are listed below. So we'll go ahead and get started. I already have my paper taped down. It's a 5x7 watercolor, 100% cotton Arches watercolor paper. I use artist's tape to tape it down. We're going to start with mixing up our color. Like I said, I'm using let's see what color I use. I believe it's a Paynes gray and a mixture of like a phthalo. So let's see. Yeah, Paynes gray with some phthalo turquoise, and then a touch of raw umber. I wanted to create a hue that I didn't exactly have readily available, so I mixed something that it's kind of bluish, turquoise, greenish. You don't have to do this. You can use whatever color you want and love. You can use just Paynes gray, and that's okay too. So bear with me as I mix up just the right color that I wanted. So we're going to start with wetting the upper 2/3 of our paper. I'm using a spray bottle just to make it faster, but you can also use a big round brush to spread out the paper just like this. Make sure that your layer of clean water is thin and there are no puddles, and make sure that you cover or add some extra water around the edges because those parts tend to dry faster. You can do one layer, let it dry a little bit, and then do a second layer. And this really helps keep the paper wet longer for us to do the wet and wet technique. So let's pick up a thick amount of the mixture, the blue mixture that we made. And I'm going to lay a line of the color across the page. Now notice that there is a small amount of the wet part of the paper underneath my horizon line. I want that to be wet below my horizon line where I dropped the color off, because I don't want the bottom part of my horizon line to dry a hard line, so the water will help prevent that. So I don't want to start my horizon line where my water ended. I hope that makes sense. So so drop in a pretty decent thick layer of this color that you've chosen, and use the tip of your round brush to flick up to create impressions of tall trees or tip-top parts of the trees. And just kind of let it flow. Don't try to control it too much. The more you mess with it, I feel like the less natural it would look. So while it dries a little bit, I'm mixing up a very, very light, very diluted layer of just mostly Paynes gray. And then I am quickly painting in a very light sky. I don't want the sky to be dark. I want it to be a nice contrast against the dark trees that I've painted first. I want to keep the middle part of my sky a little bit lighter than the surrounding part of the sky as well, just for some light coming through that part of the painting, that part of the scene. All right. Make sure that your paper is still wet throughout this process. If you need to switch over to a smaller round brush like I just did for, more quote-unquote detailed, but not really, suggestions of trees, you can do so, but make sure that your color that you're picking up to paint the tree is thick, it's dark, it's not diluted with water. All right. And when you're happy with your tree line, blend out the bottom part of your horizon before it dries too quickly and create a harsh line. I am dropping in very loosely a light, very light layer of the foreground. This is going to be our snowy foreground. So we want to keep it light. We want to pick up our brush and skip around to leave white spots. All right, very, very kind of sporadic. And then what I'm doing there is flicking in clean water all over the place. This will create textures and maybe suggestion of snow, sparkles of light. I love doing that. So at this part, you can either be happy with what has manifested on your page, or you can, fiddle with it for a little bit, but don't play with it too much. Don't mess with it too much. Try to just kind of let it be, and then it's gonna dry very differently too. And then before we are done with this step, while the page is still wet, I'm flickering in some of, tapping in some sprinkles or of some of the mixture of the color, mainly focusing on the foreground. And again, this is going to suggest snow and shadows, areas of lights and shadows that can add interest. This is not a realistic painting, so have fun with it. Be a little messy. I know this is messy, but messy can be fun and spontaneous and give us a lot of surprises. So let it dry. And while it's drying, I'm actually going to work on mixing up my next batches of colors. I'm using the same 3 colors that I used initially: Paynes Gray, Phthalo Turquoise, and Raw Umber to make the hue that I want. Now what I'm mixing up first is sort of a mid-range value. So it's not the lightest and it is not the darkest. I want to make sure I have a good amount of that. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that and start another batch and mix up the lightest value by adding in water. So I'm mixing up the lightest value right now. And then make sure you test it out on a scratch sheet of paper to make sure that you're happy with the values that you've created, the lightest value and a middle value. And then next, I'll show you how to mix the darkest value. So I'm pretty happy with that light value, and then I am happy with that medium value. And again, a reminder, watercolor will dry lighter than it looks when it's wet. All right, so starting the darkest value, and this is going to be the color that we're going to use to paint the darkest trees, the foreground trees mostly. And I'm using the same 3 colors, Paynes Gray, Phthalo Turquoise, and Raw Umber, but I'm also going to add black just to help darken the color even more, just to kind of help it out. And to make the darkest value, it is mostly pigment and not as much water. And again, make sure you test it out before you proceed. All right, before we paint the trees, make sure your first layer is completely 100% dry. To paint the trees, you want to use a thin or a small round brush or a liner brush, whichever you have, and we are using the lightest value that we mixed up earlier. Use the tip of your brush to paint in branches, mostly bare branches, up against the background. I recommend being loose with this, and I recommend also not starting the tree all the way at the horizon line. This helps it look like it's kind of embedded or kind of, embedded in the forest. And skip, and when you draw the branches, pick up your brush a little bit and kind of draw sort of skipping lines. You know, they don't always all have to be connected. Also, make sure that these trees are pretty thin because they are in the distant, and again, also a light value. Light enough to show that they are in the distance, but dark enough to show up against the background that we have painted. All right, so take your time with this part and draw in as many or as little trees as you want, and we'll move on to the next layer of trees with our second value after that. And from what I have noticed, that the more smaller branches or detailed branches that you add to your trees, I feel like it makes it look more realistic, or just more like the trees in nature, which are typically very, very messy, and there's just a lot of tiny branches. So, you know, put on some good music or a show and just paint in those tiny branches with your tiny round brush, and take your time. I know this might take a while, but just enjoy it. It can be relaxing. Make sure that you are spacing the trees out kind of randomly. Try not to make a pattern out of it. You're gonna have to pay attention to that. Your brain is gonna want to make a pattern of where the trees are gonna be, but try to be aware of that. And if you can see the one that I'm painting right now, I started the tree kind of in the middle of the background. Make sure that you blend it in a little bit into the background, like I just did with a clean, moist brush. And if you lay down too much color initially, you can always lift it up with a clean, wet, moist brush, or, wet it and pick it up with a paper towel, and you can start over. So I will see you guys on the other side of this. All right, starting our next layer of trees, I'm using the middle value mixture that we made. These trees are going to be a little closer to us than the ones we just painted, and therefore they are going to be a little darker and also a little bigger. And they're also going to start just below the horizon line, kind of in the snow in the foreground. And so we're going to do the same thing this time that we just did. And make sure that you remember to space it out. You don't have to put as many as you put in the prior layer, but make sure that you put enough for some interest, and you can even start it a little bit lower than the one that I have right now. So just kind of choose your placement, but you don't want them to be really close to the viewer or to the foreground. All right, so again, try not to make a pattern out of the placement. Make sure that you keep the values darker and the trees' trunks bigger than the layer of trees we just painted. Now we're going to work on the last layer of trees. Make sure that your prior trees are completely dry before you proceed to this next part. We are now using the darkest mixture of color that we have. And I'm also using a larger round brush. This is my round 6. When you are painting these trees, I recommend picking up your brush as you paint in the trunks. And you can see that I've left some white space in the trunk. And this is going to help us portray snow, streaks and specks of snow that has fallen and landed on the tree trunks. So try to do that, and if you find that difficult, that's okay. You can use white gouache or white acrylic paint, or a white pen if you have that, a good one, later on to paint snow onto the trunks if you prefer to do that instead of leaving white space. And so these trees are not otherwise any different from what we've done. And make sure that you kind of make the base of the tree trunk bigger as you go up, make it smaller, but the base is kind of bigger, and kind of spread it out as it goes into the ground. So again, don't make a pattern in the placement. Make sure the trunks are much bigger and darker. And yeah, otherwise, I will see you on the other end of this one. All right, so just stepping back and looking at my piece, I feel like the furthest background trees that we painted have kind of disappeared or have been covered up by the larger trees layer by layer. So I'm going back in using my lightest value. I am painting in more trees in the background that can sort of add to the composition and add to the layered look of this forest. Like I said, I feel like I've lost a lot of that. Yours might look all right. Yours may not have been all covered up. So this is just kind of based on how your painting looks after you've placed in all of your trees. You can go back in and even add the medium layer trees if you feel like you need more of that. So yeah, tweak it based on what you think you need. And if you don't like a lot of trees, don't add a lot of trees, and that's okay. So the next step is I'm using a mostly clean, moist brush, and I'm blending out the bottom parts of each of the trees. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to ground it and making it look like it belongs to the ground underneath. I'm blending out the colors at the bottom, and this helps me add shadows to the bottom part of the each tree as a way to kind of ground it, so it doesn't look like it's just kind of floating midair. And this can be very light. Again, this is snow, okay? So we want to leave a lot of white space. We want to use a lot of light value in our foreground because this is, again, snow. And make sure that when you are grounding the trees, you're not leaving any hard edges. And you can prevent hard edges by making sure that you are blending out your colors. You are not letting it dry without blending it out. So blend it into the ground, just like I'm doing right there with a clean, moist brush. Scrub it out. And you don't have to have a lot of shadows. This is not a shadowy forest. And we're not trying to be realistic either. So we're just gently grounding it. And then I'm adding splatters here and there. And I feel like the splatter kind of suggests maybe some debris on the ground as well. Tiny little broken pieces of maybe leaves or twigs. So yeah. And then we're going to let this layer dry completely, and we're going to move on after that to the last step. So hang in there. So we're going to do the snow. I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin Bleedproof White. You want to make sure that you have a very clean brush and clean water to wet the Bleedproof White. And what I typically do is I just use a clean brush, bring in the water, swirl it around, and I want to make sure that I am wetting the paint and not just sort of the surface of it. I want to pick up the actual paint so that it can be opaque and it's not just like a tint of the color with mostly water. So make sure that you are picking up a thick, opaque layer of the bleed-proof white if that's what you're using. If you're using acrylic, that's already pretty thick. So using bleed-proof white, what we're going to do is paint the snow onto the trees, and then after that we're going to splatter snow throughout the forest. I'm using the tip of my brush and just dabbing in snow on any part of the tree where snow would normally kind of accumulate. So, the parts of the tree where a branch would start from the trunk. You can also paint in streaks and flecks of snow onto the trunks themselves as well. You don't have to add snow to the far back trees. I think just the 2 layers closest to the viewer, I think would be adequate. So we're going to do some splattering of the bleed-proof white. Pick up a good amount of the bleed-proof white, and make sure that you have also adequate amount of water so that it can actually, fling off of your brush. I suggest you giving it a test tap on a sheet of paper or another piece of paper before you actually go into your painting, just so you have an idea of how big your splatter is going to be or how small, if you have enough water or not enough water. So give it at least a tap or two before you go in to your painting. I like to turn my painting around so that my splatter patterns vary and it's just not, one pattern or one direction. I want it to look, a bit more uniform. You don't want to make big splatters because we're trying to do snow, and most of the time, snow flakes are smaller. Although they could be big, but because this is such a small painting, I don't want the splatter to be, to overcome the piece. And then lastly, I am just kind of reinforcing the shadows there at the bottom, just adding more textures and interest onto the ground, onto the floor or the snow. So that was a lot of fun. I'm happy with my painting, and my favorite part is the reveal. Make sure you pull your tape away from your painting so that you don't accidentally tear your painting. And yeah, so I hope you guys painted with me. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something or felt inspired. And feel free to leave me any questions that you might have, and make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye.